Greetings and salutations, YouTube. This is Fragments of Memory, also known as your friendly neighborhood armchair philosopher. Tonight I want to sort of revisit the educated lames versus thugs argument. And this is more my point of contention in that argument. It has nothing to do with not being picked by the ladies. It has nothing to do with telling women to make better choices. That's not what it's about. Here is what it is about, is that I don't like the hypocrisy of the women when it comes to relationships and sex. Many women that get involved in the game of romance and sexuality, they will end up with the type of guy that we may label as thug, degenerate, rogue, rapscallion, whatever, and they'll complain about him. They'll scream at the top of their lungs about how niggas ain't shit, and will say all men are dogs. And I grew up hearing this type of rhetoric, but will still remain with that guy for whatever reason, or will select that type of guy. But at the same time, will complain about it. Not only complain about it, they then sort of, or at least many women, not all, let me give you that little caveat. Not all women, but enough do it so it warrants some commentary on it. But growing up, I was the young man being taught, hey, first by my mother. I was taught by my mother, hey, my sister, my aunts, not my grandmother, but women that were old enough to be my grandmother, female cousins, would talk about how don't be like this particular type of guy. But yet, and even female classmates and female friends would be like, hey, they would tell me how good of a guy I was, how nice of a guy I was. So this isn't a self-proclaiming me nice. This is what people have said about me in times past. So I'm being called this nice guy. I'm called a gentleman. I'm called a sweet guy. I'm all of this. But they would then select the guy that wasn't those things. And I think in this battle, it's like men and women want to both claim moral unassailability when it comes to the rules of attraction, to borrow that from YouTuber Black Privilege. It's like, we don't want to admit that, you know what, we can be superficial and shallow. We have this idealized image of ourselves as though we're the good people and everybody else is the bad people, when in reality, we all got a little good and bad on the inside of us. And my folks, my people, the women in my life, taught me both explicitly and implicitly to be a nice guy. At the end of the day, after all that, my mother taught me to basically be a nice guy. Hold the door open for women. Never raise your hand to a woman, even if no matter who was the one that started it. So all of that was taught to me at a very young age. And Hollywood co-signs this thinking too. Like, oh, the boy next door, the nice guy, plays white knight to the damsel in distress who was with the bad boy who she found attractive. So we get that kind of narrative going on too. So Hollywood has also co-signed that thinking, so we start to believe this. And for me, I see the hypocrisy because the very same women lodging the complaints, the very same women with the grievances, were also the same women that were saying, don't be like that guy. My mother, other women in my life, both explicitly and implicitly did this. I can remember some of the older guys, some even old enough to be my uncle and maybe some uncles and some older cousins be like, yeah, let me put this little dude on game, blah, 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 blah. And I'd always have some woman in my life saying, no, you're not going to make him like you. And they would say, in a sense, I'm going to keep him from being the type of guy that you are. But yet, the very same woman that would not want me to be that type of guy would end up with that type of guy. So I think for me, I could not handle the paradox. Like, lay with, bed, marry, date whomever you wish, but stop all basically the moral grandstanding, the moral hi-hatting, the moral I'm morally superior and you're down in the pits of hell. Now there was a philosopher named La Rochefoucauld, and I've quoted him, and I thought it was very fascinating. He spoke on it. Hypocrisy is the homage that vice pays to virtue. So it's kind of like vice knows it's low down and dirty, but it likes to play like it can be virtuous. And I think many young men like myself growing up in the 80s were sacrificed to the goddess of feminine righteous indignation. Church also aided and abetted this sort of thinking. The pastor would say, don't fornicate, don't commit adultery. Now, of course, you peel back some of those layers in some of these churches, you got the pastor committing fornication and adultery in some cases. And I just, again, go back to that, the very same women who complain are the same women who end up with the so-called thug. Growing up, I was told boys only want one thing. Then it was men only want one thing. And then, of course, I was put in this position where I had to prove I'm not like those other guys. Now, growing up, I was called scared and, scared of pussy and gay and all this other stuff. And I find that as a man, my sexual desire was criticized heavily by women. And it always came off, the narrative always seemed to be, women are the martyrs and men are the monsters. Or women are the goddesses and men are the demons. Basically, I get to be the bad guy, you get to be the martyr. And I just thought that was real foul and unfair. And maybe some of that comes from that women have had to protect themselves on an emotional, sexual, psychological level. I understand that. And they don't want to be stigmatized for having their own desire. I understand the whole concept of slut shaming and everything else. I was the type of guy that was taught to be Clark Kent, but the ladies wanted John Constantine. And at the same time, we were still told, be Clark Kent, yet don't be John Constantine, by the women who wanted John Constantine. So so to me, I could not understand the paradox. I could only scratch my head and then, of course, metaphorically beat my head against the wall. Now, let me say at this point of the video, I don't advocate stalking a woman. I don't advocate beating on a woman. I don't advocate murder. Just remember that. I don't advocate any of those things. In light of all that's been going on social media, on YouTube, on Facebook, on Instagram, whatever, don't take my words as I'm going to go seek after some lady via social media or in real life. I want to get that out the window right now. So before I get any commentary, and if you do send commentary like that, I'm going to block you because you just heard me, so don't be a dummy. But basically, yeah, I don't advocate any of that. I don't advocate shooting nobody if they reject you. I can take an L. I can be used to not being picked. I just don't like the hypocrisy that comes with it. In order to protect your supposed good name in your mind. Like, no. Just like me, if I can take the L with rejection, which is fine, you take the L with your good name, quote unquote. Well, that's my 2 cents. What do you think about it? Give me your feedback. Peace.